The paper I will be presenting today is a result of work that's been longstanding around the partnership, around CRIM Partnerships project on institutional experimentation, and is work that's been, as François said, work that's been done with in collaboration with Christian, Gregor, and Nicolas. So it's no secret to say that for the past 40 years, the combined effects of fast evolving technologies, flexibilization, globalization, and privatization has had a major impact on work arrangements and working conditions, and significant changes and disruptions have ensued. So as I've been talking about this for the last 24 hours, the actors are engaging in various forms of experimentation that can lead to better or to worse work, or a combination of both, right? So what we're trying to look at here is from a theoretical perspective, what is better and what is worse work, and basically trying to take a more encompassing approach because that's what we think is required to really understand the transformations that are taking place in the world of. So just maybe to also say that other indicators and frameworks have sought to provide what is said to be a springboard to evaluate the theoretically challenging and policy relevant issue of the quality of work. Obviously, different job quality indicators, the meaning of work framework, and the decent work framework, which also we are building on to construct this better and worse work framework that draws on these contributions, but seeks to broaden the often a little overly narrow focus on the quality of specific jobs, which is too limited in our perspective and scope. So in our view, better work encompasses two dimensions. A first objective dimension that seeks really to map the work and employment conditions, as well as a subjective dimension that requires to grasp the meaning of work for those who are actually performing it. So what is the standpoint? The standpoint is the worker, and specifically those facing a higher degree of precariousness. And for what are we looking at this through this lens of better work? It is to ensure the physical and psychosocial integrity of workers and their ability to be democratically engaged. And this is regardless of their migratory status. And this is something really I want to stress on today. So what is our normative lens for understanding the impact of how actors are experimenting? And so there's three main dimensions that I want to really pull out today. And then I'm going to dwell into some examples to illustrate how these three dimensions really allow us to understand how different forms of experimentation lead to better or to worse work. So the first dimension is economic and social risk, which is obviously all the idea around the allocation of social risk, their impact on organizational and societal policies and practice. How much is risk mutualized or individualized and allocated at different levels? The second dimension is the dimension around autonomy and subordination. And this is obviously the impact of how the psychosocial dimensions of work. As we know, work is intensifying, and how much workers have control over their work, how work is increasingly, the boundaries between work and non-work is increasingly blurred, and how workers are increasingly facing work-family balance issues. The third dimension is the expressivity dimension, which is a very encompassing dimension, which is about self-realization, voice and engagement, but also seeks to see how workers can actually mobilize certain skill sets, how can they acquire other skill sets, how can their collective and individual voice can be heard, and how can workers can increasingly be engaged in their communities and organizations. So I just want to now kind of look into some specific examples just in order to illustrate how this framework can actually allow us to look at in an empirical perspective how actors are actually experimenting. And I'm going to give you two examples. I'm going to draw around platform work and telework to give these examples and show how research can be aggregated around the analysis of these three dimensions to understand how work can become better or worse for different categories of workers. So the other thing that's extremely important to say is that workers clearly understand the requirements and possibilities of these different three dimensions, and sometimes seek to find some balance between these three dimensions. And this can involve choices and trade-offs. And that's another dimension that we have to look on. What are the trade-offs that workers are doing between the three dimensions? And then yet again, how actors are yet again experimenting, facing these trade-offs to address these issues that some subgroups of workers are facing. So if we take again, and these obviously are not my ideas or my research results, but rather the result of an aggregation of research that's conducted by several of you in this room and others. But the first dimension, when we think of platform work in terms of economic and social risks, is to think of what kind of health risks are related to platform work, the prevalence of work-related injuries, etc. The economic risks, what kind of work-related expenses do platform workers have to assume? Do they access fair compensation? Autonomy and control for platform workers. So some research has showed us that platform work is actually a way to access flexibility for some groups of workers that compose with work-family balance issues, or for some students that are composing also with work study issues, trying to find a balance there. Does platform work really enhance the possibility to access work-family balance or other forms of balances that we seek to reach in our professional life? The third dimension here around expressivity is also around all the research that talks and speaks to how platform workers are increasingly atomized, and it's harder to actually drive collective action for these workers. Does platform work contribute to de-skilling a part of the workforce? Several research has shown that for a part of the workforce that's issued from immigration, platform work can contribute to de-skilling because these workers cannot find jobs where their skills are actually mobilized. Does it contribute, on the contrary, to enhance the employability of other groups of workers? So when we look at these three dimensions, we have to look at who trades what workers, what groups of workers are trading what. Platform work can allow for more flexibility, but can also entail more risk and atomization. So this is for my first example, and then I'll come back to how these trade-offs can also lead to further experimentation. So if I take a second example, which is the example of telework. So when we look at economic and social risk of teleworkers, again, here this is resulting from an aggregation of research that is done by several. We also have to look at the health risks that are related. I'm sorry, it says platform work, but it's telework. So ergonomics, several research has shown that telework can entail ergonomic risks, how it can entail mental risks, mental health risks also because workers are isolated, working from home, lacking social contact. Again, from the economic perspective, from telework, what about work-related expenses that are transferred to the workers increasingly to telework? That's another issue that has to be looked at. Now, autonomy and control, yet again, same for platform workers, is the quest for flexibility of teleworkers sought and fulfilled. We've heard a lot that telework is a way to actually enhance work-family balance. But how does that actually play off when we know that the boundaries between work time and not work time are increasingly blurred with telework? What are the new surveillance means? The new surveillance means that are coming with telework, and that can have an impact on how workers can feel autonomous and feel that they have control over their work. Again, on the expressivity level, I think this is something that is starting to be looked at in research, but this telework requires another skill set, ability to maneuver certain technological instruments that are not necessarily required when you're working from the office. So that's another set of questions that can be looked at in the expressivity dimension. So here, what are the possible trade-offs? And yet again, who trades what is the main question that has to be asked here. And telework can serve, and this is also something that is being set out, a tool to reach decarbonization goals, because obviously workers are not going to work and are not using means of transportation, and enhance work-family balance, but also can entail important ergonomic risks and an increasing blurring of the boundaries between work time and non-work time, and obviously an increasing digital surveillance of workers. So this is going to be my last slide. No, I don't have the right PowerPoint. That's strange. Okay, forget the PowerPoint. So I guess we have to look at, in all of these trade-offs, how are actors navigating these trade-offs and displaying new ways to resist? And from the doctoral school to yesterday, I've heard a lot of research that is looking into that. When we look at different forms of disruption, different forms of experimentation that lead to certain trade-offs, how are actors reacting to these trade-offs, and how are they displaying other forms of experimentation to answer these trade-offs? So when we look at telework, how are unions, for instance, responding to the new challenges that are set by telework, by negotiating conditions, specific conditions around telework? They're displaying new strategies to actually access the workers that are working from home, people that are atomized and working in different in different places, basically. So unions, as we've seen in the past, specifically and increasingly in the past 3 years, have displayed a very vast array of strategy to simultaneously answer the challenges of the atomization caused by telework, as well as the enthusiasm caused by telework, because this is really two things that come in sync. There is challenges, but workers are extremely, increasingly enthusiastic to perform work through telework. The other thing that's being looked at more and more by research, and here I'm echoing a research done by one of my doctoral students, David Shaw, workers individually are in subgroups of workers, notwithstanding the role of the union, are organizing themselves in very small groups and small units to respond to challenges caused by telework. Groups of workers are experimenting different strategies to self-regulate and to avoid the counter effects of the blurring of the boundaries between work and non-work time. And there's different examples of this. A group of workers that will decide amongst each other that they will not send each other messages on Teams, on email at night, because one of the member of the team cannot answer the messages, and that would cause pressure on this worker if she knew that others are working and not her. And this is very interesting because this example is in a unionized setting, and it's not with the union did not intervene to do this, but it's really the workers amongst themselves that organized to actually answer the pressure that was leaking, I'd say, from the new ways of working through telework. In different national contexts, and this is extremely important, I think we have to really look into this, the inspectorate, not necessarily because of formal legislative changes, but because of a change of the practices of the inspectorate, have decided increasingly in different national settings to tailor their modes of intervention to this new reality. When we look at platform work now, again, looking at how actors answers the trade-offs and re-experimenting in front of these disruptions, we know that in front of platform work, some states have introduced policies, labor laws, but also new and innovative social security schemes. And this, I'm insisting on that. We have to start looking at how states are reacting to address social security for platform workers, because this is also a way for platform workers in certain contexts, not necessarily to look at changes to labor law, because they feel reassured by these new social security schemes that are answering certain risks that ensue from platform work. So states have introduced policy, labor laws, social security schemes to better protect platform workers or to regulate the activities of platform work, or platforms, which is two different things, right? You can intervene to regulate the work and how are the working conditions coming, but you can also regulate the way platforms are organized and the types of services and activities that they can pursue. While other states have decided to adopt a more liberal stance and not intervene with new legislative measures. In different contexts, and here I'm echoing the work of my colleague here, Claudia Amara, that I've heard and very interesting in the doctoral school. In different contexts, unions have broadened the scope of intervention to integrate with more or less success according to the context. platform workers within their reach. And this is not necessarily a top-down approach where unions are looking to integrate platform workers in their work, but it can also come from a bottom-up approach where workers are organizing through different means than the formal means that we know of, and that one day or the other, yes or no, in different contexts, unions can actually embrace these new collective action methods within their reach and integrate these workers in more formalized collective action. So I'm going to stop here by saying, obviously, by concluding that actors respond to disruptions of traditional or predominant forms of regulation of work and employment. And this is obviously, and this we have to remember this, for unions, for states, and also in a way for employers, it's a challenge for their institutional legacies, typical modes of intervention, and skill sets. And we have to also look in terms of experimentation, understanding where the trade-offs take place and how actors are reacting to these trade-offs, that experimentation takes place at different levels, at a workplace, firm or organization, sector or industry, a region, or a society in a more diffused way. It can take different forms. It can be a policy, a legislation, an agreement, a strategy, a practice that is more ad hoc. It can be permanent, it can be temporary, or it can be a total failure as well, which is not uninteresting to document also. So just to conclude very rapidly, we have to know and understand, and I think this is the whole goal of the enterprise here that we're pursuing through the partnership, as actors are engaged in a reflective exercise of learning and developing new collective capability. Thank you.